You got to hand it to Tim Blair. He's all over it. While I struggled to keep up with the technicalities there at Bathurst, the news has broken that the Bathurst winner, Scott McLaughlin, may lose his title. Made it provisional. They're investigating this idea that his teammate slowed down drivers further behind there under the yellow flag. So you heard it there first from Tim Blair. You'll hear a lot more about that as the day progresses, no doubt. Let's cross back down to Canberra now and catch up with... Excuse me, with Kristen Brookfield from the Housing Industry Association. Thanks for joining us, Kristen. The reason we wanted to talk to you today is it looks like this first homeowners scheme is going to get through Parliament. It will go through the Senate today. Both the government and Labor support this. This is the scheme that helps the government underwrite a deposit for first home buyers. So you might only have to save for a 5% deposit, and then the government will help underwrite the rest of the deposit. Do you expect this to be very useful?
Look, we do, Chris, and thanks for having us on. It's a scheme that really offers a great opportunity for the people who will be eligible to get into a home sooner, to access a home loan and bridge that deposit gap problem. You know, when you're trying to save 20% and you're paying rent, that's a really hard get these days. So this scheme's targeted exactly at that issue of deposit gap, which we think is a really timely change.
Is this a case, though, where the scheme has failed to catch up with reality? This sort of scheme was talked about as being desperately needed when we had real estate prices running amok, and, of course, interest rates are a bit higher as well. But now with these record low interest rates, the heat's come out of the housing market as well. Is it really needed?
Look, the heat might have shifted rather than say it's out of the market, but accessing your first home is still a challenge. 20% is still a big saving with the average price of a home, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne these days. So if people are able to come into the market, and I can remember the days where, you know, the basic deposit was 10%, not 20%. We're not talking about scenarios where you have no savings, but we are talking about a situation where you can save, you have the ability to service that loan, but you would have to do it these days with mortgage insurance, and that's an upfront sting. Put that on top of stamp duty, and it really makes accessing your first home hard. Once you're in the market, it's different, and that's the other thing. This scheme is targeted at first home buyers, which allows them to move out of rental into home ownership and to begin their journey on that housing ladder.
It is tough, but it always has been. I suppose the key here, and you made reference to it then, is the demand for a 20% deposit. As you said earlier, previously, in earlier years, 10% was adequate. Is the real problem here not so much the increasing cost of housing, or certainly where interest rates are, but the banking practices where, for all sorts of reasons, they're demanding a 20% deposit?
Well, you're right, the banking practices have changed. But again, if you look at this scheme and what's on offer compared with current banking practices, we do have banks who are offering people mortgages on less than 20% deposit, but they come with that tail of a lender's mortgage insurance. So the market's doing this now. This is not a situation where we're actually saying move back to having no support, but saying here's an alternative pathway that the government is prepared to back you on.
Yeah, what's the reaction going to be from the mortgage insurance industry? Really, they've got the government in there as a competitor now.
Look, it's only a small piece of the market. So the reality of this is it's a pilot scheme. It's for 10,000 homes each year for the next 3 years. And yet the first home buyer market each year on year is around 110,000. So there is still quite a lot of people who will be going to their banks and looking for their first home mortgage who may choose to go in with less than 20% and still be talking to some of those sorts of brokers.
And Kristen, if that gets through Parliament today, how long before we expect to see this first home owners scheme in place?
So the scheme, the government committed to it starting in January next year, so 1st of January 2020. There is still a lot of detail that we are waiting to see on how it will operate, and we've got a few months left to get that information. But the bill passing today creates the ability for the government to now tell us the rest of the information.
Thanks for joining us, Kristen.